The new season of Wilderness Survival is here, with 12 returning internet celebrities trying to survive 14 days in Montana's frigid Rocky Mountains. They just have to last 14 days in the cold, dry Rocky Mountains of Montana to win the $500,000 prize. Predators are also a concern. What obstacles await them? The first group is positioned in a steep valley. They are Vaz, Jack, and Sarah, a team of 2 men and 1 woman. Vaz is a skilled hunter. He once caught a huge fish. Jack is a leader, the hardest worker in the team, and the most enthusiastic contestant. Sarah is an excellent support player, but her weakness is the cold. This group is quite strong. The second group is located 11 kilometers northeast on a mountain. They'll face rivers and moose. This team includes Rod, Tracy, and Jermaine, another 2-man 1-woman group, but Tracy is a wild card. Fans who have watched her in previous seasons know she can single-handedly drag the whole team down. The third group, 16 kilometers southwest, faces less snow but fierce winds. This team includes Gary, Kai, and Joe. It's a team of 2 women and 1 man. Joe is a previous champion, though he mostly won by default. Kai has completed 3 challenges. Kai has proven to be an excellent hunter. Gary, a female contestant, has thrived in 3 different environments. 2 female champions and 1 male have returned. Joe seems to be the happiest man this season. The fourth group is 11 kilometers east. The Wolfpacks here pose a serious threat. Wes, Sarah, and Jermaine make up this group, which might be the weakest. 2 experienced contestants are teamed with a newcomer. The primary challenge in this survival game is braving the severe cold of the snowy mountains. They are fully exposed to the biting cold. Once the game begins, they follow the map's directions. Heading to their respective destinations for the challenge, Wes felt frozen stiff within seconds of taking off his clothes. Winter has already gripped the Rocky Mountains, and the cold is intensifying. Walking barefoot in the snow is sheer agony. Sarah can't move any further, and the wind here is fierce. Just being exposed to the wind could be deadly. Wes's group spotted a large rock ahead. Jermaine suggested building a shelter there, as the rock forms a natural barrier. Moreover, a nearby water source offered fishing opportunities, so they chose to build their shelter there. A gust of wind swept through. Wes crouched on the ground, frozen in place. Meanwhile, Rod's group carefully treaded on the dry grass. The snow was too icy to handle. Ahead, a barren forest awaited, and they couldn't afford to delay. They pushed straight through. Soon, Wes and his team arrived at their spot and found a partially built shelter. Due to the extreme cold, each team got a shelter framework to finish on their own, along with iron pots, fire starters, and fur for warmth. Most importantly, the show provided fur for warmth. Now, they just needed to perfect their shelter. Sarah's group had a Hogan-style shelter. This wooden structure was very sturdy, built with a lot of timber. Covering it with branches would help block the wind and add warmth, but the shelter alone couldn't keep them warm. Their immediate priority was to start a fire. Only fire could keep them warm. Rod's group also found their shelter. Their first task was to modify the fur, turning it into shoes. Otherwise, walking in the snow. Walking in the snow would be very risky. The cold weather limited blood flow in their feet, causing the capillaries to freeze easily. This could lead to cell damage. Spotting frostbite would be risky. They had to depend on both survival skills, but also on physical fitness. Everyone donned the fur, except for Vaz and Jack, who were working shirtless to improve the shelter. Even though there were plenty of branches, the small leaves wouldn't offer much wind protection or warmth. Sarah stayed inside the shelter. While Jack and Vaz focused on improving the shelter, Sarah was tasked with maintaining the fire. If she failed to get it going, she would be practically useless. Vaz and Jack gave her their fur, but despite using a lot of wood for the shelter, it was still freezing. They had to collect many branches to insulate it. Luckily, Sarah managed to start the fire, and they instantly felt warmer. In this scenario, the men's labor was indispensable. The more men in the team, the better their chances of survival. Vaz and Jack strategized, while Sarah arranged the bedding with branches. The sun sets early in the Rockies, so they had to hurry to finish the shelter. Kai's group quickly wrapped themselves in fur. Although the girls feared the cold, their unique, minimal clothing made them invincible and even sexy, sweating even when wrapped in a cloth. This high-altitude terrain means overexertion can cause oxygen deficiency. Altitude sickness would force them to quit. Gary spotted animal tracks, hinting at a chance for roasted meat. Joe also found bones here, with some meat still on them. Kai thinks this must be leftovers from other animals. This means that there might be carnivores nearby. Large feline predators could appear in their area. This is more frightening than wolf packs. Kai believes they should avoid the western path, fearing lions might be lurking. Wes and his team search for shelter materials. They find many pine cones, but Wes doubts they'll keep out the rain. The leaves are too small and sparse, but it's all they can find. Jermaine has deep insights into building shelters. Sarah is good at making clothes from fur, a skill very suitable for this place. Wes has excellent hunting skills. Wes can supply the team with protein. He gathered many branches, brought them to the shelter, and layered them on the wooden frame. This can provide some wind protection. Keeping warm is very necessary. In the cold, a person's heart rate will speed up. However, if body temperature keeps falling, the heart rate will slow down, risking organ failure. Meanwhile, Rod's team has been massaging their feet since they got there. Why don't they think of using fire to keep warm? Jermaine thinks he has kidney deficiency and can't stand the cold on his feet. He needs to quickly improve the shelter. Tracy, though having some hunting skills, is really a madman. Rod is also quite good at hunting. Jermaine is a former champion. The first day is very limited in time. They must quickly upgrade the shelter to avoid shivering at night. Tracy's fur shoes are very slick. Walking in them is tough. Rod has kidney issues and back pain. Likely won't last long. Mostly pine trees here. Almost every team is using pine branches to build their shelters. Joe's team is progressing very quickly. Their shelter is almost complete. I didn't think the girls would be so skilled. However, the wind is strong and the shelter's spot is too drafty. It needs to be built snugly. Wes and his team are chopping pine branches non-stop, racing to finish the shelter before dark. Otherwise, they risk catching a cold the next day as the temperature will drop even further at night. Wes can already feel it getting colder. While collecting branches, they moved very slowly. Walking barefoot in such extreme cold can easily lead to cuts. This slows down their drying process. In Tracy's group, despite having two men, one suffers from kidney issues and back pain. The other has minor kidney pain, putting this group at a disadvantage. Despite gathering many branches, why didn't they collect dry grass for bedding? Sleeping on the ground drains body heat. Their shelter isn't even finished yet, and they're just sitting inside talking. They even relocated the shelter. A smaller space retains heat better. Aren't they just causing problems for themselves? They should prioritize securing the shelter over modifying it. Their choices directly affect their progress. This decision will surely slow them down. Vaz's group pauses every half hour to keep blood flowing in their feet. Jack suddenly noticed his foot was cut. Maybe it was too cold for him to feel it. This is a hidden danger in extreme cold challenges. A foot injury will surely impact Jack's future challenges. Why didn't they consider making shoes from fur? They lit a fire inside the shelter for warmth, but it melted the ice, making everything damp. As night fell, they felt increasingly cold. At night, they were too cold to sleep, constantly tending the fire and venturing out for wood. At Gary's camp, they took shifts tending the fire, allowing Kai and Joe to rest. This group likely had the best night. Wes's group watched the fire too, and their hot water froze on the ground. Rod's group couldn't sleep because of the cold. They stayed up watching the fire. Why didn't they take shifts like Kai's group? Then everyone could rest. By the second day, Jack's group hadn't slept all night, huddling under the fur. Vaz and Jack sandwiched Sarah in the middle. Even though the sun was out, they didn't want to get up. They spent the whole night curled up. When Sarah got up, she found her eyes were swollen. She suspected the fur caused her allergy. Vaz's group started strong, but Jack's foot injury. And with Sarah struggling in the cold, their workforce dwindled. Rod's group didn't complete their shelter yesterday. Today, they must keep working on it. With Jermaine's injured foot, Rod is handling most of the labor. However, he often stays in the shelter with Tracy to keep warm. Rod goes outside to fetch water and even brings back a pot of blood to cook. He's doing his best for the team. Rod realizes it's about to rain, and their shelter isn't ready yet. This will surely lead to leaks. Despite last night's cold discomfort, Kai's group feels much better this morning. At least they got some sleep. Their shelter is much better now, and as long as they stay warm, surviving here shouldn't be a big problem. The sky suddenly changes, and Kai realizes it's going to rain. They must prepare for it. Gary goes out to fetch water. Kai works on the shelter, and Joe is lying inside. It's like having two secretaries for survival, one for work, one for rest. Wes's group is also working on their shelter. They take this rain very seriously. Everyone in their group is helping out. Without the sun, they're freezing. They need to warm up in the shelter after working outside, or they'll risk frostbite. Wes is determined not to lose a teammate. In this environment, more people mean more strength, but Jermaine is feeling unwell, possibly due to altitude sickness. Wes's group might lose a teammate because of this. Jermaine needs to keep warm, or it could be really dangerous. I'm most envious of Kai's group. The two girls are very proactive. It's noticeably colder today than yesterday. They rely on wood for warmth at night, so Joe is gathering more pine branches to reinforce their shelter. To keep warm, their shelter is the most secure. Joe appears to be low on oxygen. He needs to sit down, drink water, and rest. But with two girls taking care of him, it's worth it. Joe is likely dehydrated. In this cold, dry air, sweat vanishes quickly. If you don't stay hydrated, your heart rate goes up. Increasing body temperature speeds up dehydration. Joe may have overdone it while chopping branches. Tracy's shelter hasn't made any progress. Rod is collecting wood. Without a proper shelter, they can't sleep due to the cold. Contestants trying to coast are clearly struggling here. Tracy and Jermaine are busy in the shelter. He's no help at all, just keeps saying thank you and is totally useless. Rod, out of breath, sits outside the shelter. Having these two as teammates is like the worst luck ever. So, what situations will they encounter next? Don't miss the next video update. Wilderness Survival has launched its new season, and it might be the toughest yet. 12 past champions are back, braving the snow-covered mountains at -30 degrees. Believe it or not, they even stripped down to their underwear. By the second day, after a night of freezing winds, most teams hadn't slept a wink, huddled under their furs, shivering. The Kai team still managed to laugh, thanks to their well-built shelter. Early in the morning, Kai and Gary went hunting. Kai caught a whiff of musk, and Gary, puzzled, asked why she could smell it when they were both women. Maybe it was a special skill. They began scouting the area. With limited daylight, their hunting window was short. Soon, they stumbled upon a fresh pile of animal droppings that looked oddly tempting. Gary, following the scent, joined in. They examined it closely but didn't dare suggest eating it. It turned out to be bear scat, likely from a black or brown bear. While not magical, it could stave off hunger. Just when they thought the bear scat was surprising enough, they spotted something even more alarming: bear tracks in the snow nearby. There were numerous bear tracks, causing Gary and Kai's hearts to race. The tracks were alarmingly close to their shelter, indicating bears had been nearby. Judging by the footprints, it seemed to be a family of 3 bears out for a stroll, and bears on a stroll have a very good appetite. Kai thought they should carry long spears for protection next time, or they might not survive. Both Kai and Gary grew nervous. Meanwhile, Vaz and Jack were still huddled in their sleeping bags, reluctant to get up. Sarah looked outside. It was snowing heavily and extremely cold. The shelter wasn't fully built yet, and snow kept falling inside. Snow continued to fall into the shelter. Despite being a team of 2 men and 1 woman, Vaz and Jack refused to hunt, leaving everyone huddled inside. Jack believed he could survive 14 days without food and water, but Sarah's uncle needed to eat before sleeping. Vaz admired Sarah and kept urging him to find food. They made shoes from fur. Mornings were bitterly cold, warming only by noon. Jack built a stone fireplace to radiate heat and make the shelter warmer. To make the shelter warmer, they used stones to block and reflect the heat from the fire. Rod's group was incredibly lazy. 2 men and an old lady were supposed to be surviving, but now it's just Jeremy and Rod doing the work while the old lady sleeps, waiting for the prize money. Rod had severe back pain and kidney issues, making survival in the snowy mountains tough for him. He went out to fart and then went back to lie down. Jeremy was chopping wood to make a fire for warmth, but his teammates were just there to sleep. Jeremy really disliked this. 5 years ago, he and his teammates were surviving in the Philippines, but he quit because he couldn't stand the hardship. Ever since he got home, he had been regretting it. Now that he's back in the wild, he feels he must prove himself. This time, he won't back down because of difficulties. He plans to hunt in the west, but Jeremy has a weak constitution, especially in this cold. His feet freeze easily. He takes his bow and arrow, looking for beavers, while Jeremy stays behind, waiting for winter food to become scarce. He hears something, a beaver foraging nearby. He slowly approaches, takes aim, but his shot is way off. This frustrates him so much that his back starts hurting. The West tribe has already gone out hunting. At least they aren't lying around in the shelter all day. The weather is freezing, and Wes feels they must continue improving their shelter, or their old bones won't make it. Jermaine maintains the fire inside the shelter, while collecting wood is one of their most crucial tasks. They rely on burning wood to stay warm at night. Why don't they build a large stone wall to reflect heat back into their sleeping area? It would be much more efficient. The winter wind is dry, and Jermaine is extremely thirsty. He takes a metal pot outside to gather snow. Jermaine takes a metal pot outside to gather snow for boiling water. It's freezing, and his butt feels like it's turning to ice. After collecting the snow, he rushes back to boil it. The cold severely affects him. In such extreme conditions, blood vessels constrict, reducing thirst but increasing urination, which can lead to unnoticed dehydration. Once the water is ready, they eagerly drink it, as it's the only thing that can warm them up. Their shelter is cramped, and everyone just sits around waiting for nightfall. Why not go out and improve the shelter for a more comfortable sleep? At night, the temperature plummets, and Wes is so cold he can't sleep. The fire in the pit is too small to keep them warm. Was too small to keep them warm. Wes was so cold he started vomiting. Vomiting is manageable, but diarrhea would mean his teammates carrying him back home overnight. By the 3rd day, Wes felt extremely unwell. Maybe it was the freezing weather. His old bones just couldn't handle it. They just sat in the shelter, doing nothing. Is this what wilderness survival is supposed to be? It should be called wilderness suffering. Both Lacey and Jermaine were feeling unwell, leaving only Sarah to fetch water. She noticed a lot of snow algae on the ground, which appears when the snow melts. Maybe Wes drank this water yesterday, causing his vomiting. Snow algae can spread viruses. It's all Jermaine's fault for being too lazy, using snow to boil water when there was a stream right next to them. They're now depending on water to curb their hunger. In this freezing environment, lacking protein makes them feel even colder. After drinking, Wes felt much better. Meanwhile, on Wes's side, yesterday, they improved the stone wall, and the extra heat made a noticeable difference. Storing that heat would be even better, which can be done by sealing the shelter well. Today, they plan to keep enhancing the shelter. Sarah will perfect the bedding, Vass will work on the shelter, and Jack will hunt for food. They gathered many reed stalks to make their bedding more comfortable. Sarah, who fears the cold, focuses on improving the shelter's interior, ensuring the two men sleep more comfortably at night. Sarah is seen by Vaz as merely playing a supporting role. Breakfast is just water. Vaz and Jack went hunting, hoping to catch something. Meanwhile, Jeremy from the Rod team got up early to hunt. In the cold, body fat helps regulate temperature, burning nearly 400 calories per hour. Without protein, they'll lose weight quickly. Jeremy searched the shore for rabbits or fish, but had to return periodically to warm up. His family doubted he'd last 7 days, but he's determined to make it to 14. Tracy was warming herself by the fire in the shelter. Rod had been lying down since the first day due to back pain, seemingly hoping to win by doing nothing. Rod's back had always been an issue, which he suspected was due to kidney deficiency. Now, he just lay in the shelter, unwilling to get up unless there was meat to eat. He knew Tracy would keep talking non-stop. In past challenges, his teammate Amber had disliked him for his constant chatter. Now, he faced the same situation. Waking up and lying down, the Kai team, made up of 2 women and 1 man, turns out to be the hardest working group. Joe is thrilled because the 2 girls are very proactive, while he is as weak as a worm. He plans to rely on Gary and Kai to carry him through. Joe's poor health worries Gary. They search for prey nearby, and Joe spots rabbit tracks. Following the tracks, Gary soon sees the rabbit. If they can catch it, they'll have a feast of roasted meat tonight. But they only have a machete. A bow and arrow would have been better. A bow and arrow might have been better. Joe picks up a stone, aims, and throws it, but the rabbit escapes. It's really a pity because they don't have proper hunting tools. Now they regret not bringing a bow and arrow. Jeremy has been out looking for prey and finds bird feathers on the ground. Had he found it sooner, he might have gotten some scraps to eat. Squatting and panting, he felt unwell and feverish, likely from a cold. Eventually, he couldn't walk. The cameraman quickly asked what was wrong. As his breathing worsened, the cameraman wanted to call a doctor, but he refused, not wanting to go home. For his safety, the doctor came anyway. Jeremy was still upset, but the doctor asked him to sit for an examination. After some basic questions, the doctor advised more water and protein. Overall, his condition was still good. In the end, Jeremy chose to stay and continue the challenge. Jermaine had to go out and gather firewood. It was freezing, and despite his size, he shivered like a little girl. He came back with just 2 branches. Though big, he was terrified of the cold, and Jeremy worried his toes might get frostbitten. This group was basically done for. Jermaine was useless, Wes was old, and Sarah, though strong, wouldn't hunt. They relied on fire and water to survive. Sarah kept modifying the fur to keep them warm, and only the 2 cows at home weren't afraid of the cold. Only then do they have a chance to hunt for food. Sarah proves to be quite useful. You'd never guess that someone as big as Jermaine would be so afraid of his but getting cold. It's like he's brought shame to Africans in the Arctic. His but is the first thing he wants to keep warm. Vaz and Jack have been scouring the forest for prey, craving protein. In this freezing weather, they're dreaming of a roasted meal. They spotted a rabbit and prepared to hunt it, but unfortunately, they missed. Still, it was their first attempt. Even though they missed the rabbit, they weren't too disappointed. They found some wild berries instead, which, despite tasting like cardboard, can provide vitamin C. They picked them to avoid starving. Meanwhile, Sarah was busy improving the mattress in the shelter, making it much warmer for the night. When Vaz and Jack returned and saw the upgraded mattress, they were impressed. Looking good, looks great.
Looks
yeah, that's
great,
completed
yeah.
for now.
That's
Sarah
completed
felt
for
very
now.
touched by their approval. Back at the shelter, they felt much more comfortable. If only they could have some rabbit roast now, they would sleep even better. At night, Sarah still felt very cold, so they covered themselves with fur and huddled inside. On the 4th day, Joe went out early to collect wood. He felt extremely cold, his body trembling non-stop, which made him very tired. He didn't get much work done, as all his energy was spent on shivering to keep warm. After working for just a minute, he said he needed to rest. But Joe is the only boy in this group, so Kai and Gary had to pamper him and bring him back to the shelter to rest. The girls went out to hunt and work, while Joe seemed to have 2 assistants helping him survive. During the day, the assistants worked, but not at night. They found many waterfowl and edible grasses, which provided some vitamins. Gary collected some and brought them back. Finding something to eat was better than going hungry. It started snowing again, and the weather got even colder. The way back with the vegetable soup was tough, but the girls didn't complain. Joe was shivering in the shelter, feeling like his body was constantly burning energy. Slowly, he collapsed onto the ground. Heavy snow began to fall outside the shelter, but Gary and Kai were still out. When they returned, they called out, "Is the small fire still big?" Inside, Joe was sweating profusely and seemed to have fainted. This was really bad. He was sweating, but his hands and feet were cold. Luckily, he was just very uncomfortable and hadn't passed out. Gary and Kai were very worried. Although Joe wasn't very useful, he could warm the bed at night. In this weather, having one more teammate is better than having one less. Joe mentioned this had happened before, and Kai immediately realized it was because of the mink fur. His body was so weak, like a delicate young master. Gary used the wild vegetables they had gathered to make a pot of soup. It tasted alright, and at least it filled their stomachs and warmed them up. Meanwhile, Jack continued searching for food outside. He found a stream and tried breaking the ice with a stick, hoping to catch some fish for protein. Overall, it was quite solid. Most of the stream was frozen. If they could catch a beaver or trout, it would be even better. Jack planned to block the water flow, which would gather the fish, making fishing much easier. But the ice on top was very unsafe. He collected a lot of wood and threw it into the water to block it, staying there for a while. He felt very cold and needed to go back to warm up, and he called Vaz to prepare for fishing. He placed 2 stones on the ground to mark whether the water was accumulating. When he returned, Vaz came along, and they found the stones were gone, meaning the water had started accumulating. Sarah also came out to watch the excitement. Blocking the stream worked well, and the water level was significantly higher. They could see trout under the water from the shore. What they did today gave them hope. The cold wasn't scary. What was scary was having no food at dawn. They were imitating the beavers' method, using wood to block the water flow. They collected a lot of wood and blocked the water flow completely. If the beavers saw this, they would definitely curse them for being mean. But to catch fish, they couldn't care less. Vaz believed he could definitely catch a fish. On the 5th day, Rod's group woke up early, with an old lady sandwiched between 2 men. Although it was very crowded, the old lady was smiling happily. Rod kept farting, and they didn't get up until noon. Rod planned to go out to find food, while Jeremy and Tracy sat in the shelter panting, perhaps knocked out by Rod's farts. Rod planned to hunt by the river, hoping to catch something to eat. Jeremy was happy to see Rod finally stand up. Given his history of complaining about back pain and taking 5 days off before doing any work, it was crucial for Rod to contribute. Otherwise, the old lady would starve. Spotting a beaver by the river, Rod decided to set a trap, hoping to secure food. Despite the strong wind and his aching back, he quickly assembled the trap, testing it repeatedly until it was set. His back pain was excruciating, making him feel like he couldn't go on, and his work efficiency was worse than the old lady's. He stood there, trying to ease his back pain, almost in tears from exhaustion. The pain made him sad because he didn't want to abandon his teammates. Rod returned to the shelter to explain his condition. His back might be seriously injured, and he might not be able to continue. Despite Jeremy and Tracy's offer to take care of him, he decided to quit to avoid holding them back. The show crew confirmed his decision and took him away. Before leaving, Rod set up a hunting trap, hoping to provide food for his team. After Rod left, their team lost another labor force, and now they mainly relied on Jeremy. Wes's situation wasn't much better. His teammate Jermaine was afraid of the cold, and Wes was an old man. The temperature at night was very low, and everyone was afraid because it was really too cold. What surprises will they bring us next? Stay tuned for the next episode. You wouldn't believe the lengths they go to just to get a meal. In the freezing mountains, with temperatures below zero, a brave girl dives into the water without hesitation to catch fish. They build a dam by the stream and create a hunting device, risking their lives to catch some trout. To catch rabbits, they set up hundreds of traps in the forest. This is the toughest season I've ever seen. On the 6th day of the new season of Survivor in the Wild, Kai wakes up to find everything covered in a thicker layer of snow than yesterday. Last night was the coldest they've ever experienced. The few centimeters team is down to 2 people. Rod had to quit due to back pain from kidney issues. Now it's just few centimeters and Granny Tracy. Tracy really misses being sandwiched between 2 men at night. In this freezing weather, the closer, the better. The Wazzy team isn't doing much better. Even with Sarah sleeping between 2 men, she still felt cold, and Jack said he felt like his balls were freezing off. If they hadn't improved their mattress during the day, they might have turned into popsicles by now. The Kai team has it the best, with 2 amazing girls and 1 guy. Every night, Joe from the Kai team feels like he's on cloud 9. Their shelter is also the best, allowing them to sleep comfortably every night. A lion appeared near their shelter, and its roar was terrifying. They huddled in their blankets, too scared to make a sound. The next morning, when Kai went hunting, they saw tracks nearby. Gary thought they were lion tracks, and they were everywhere. Kai felt the lions were close. The tracks were huge, so they had to be extra careful. Soon, they found the remains of a fresh prey. To avoid bringing the scent back to the shelter, they left the bones behind. From now on, they had to carry weapons or bows when going out. Lions had become their biggest threat. If it were me, I would have taken those fresh bones back to the shelter. If it were me, I would have taken those fresh bones back to the shelter and made soup. Joe was resting at the shelter, feeling weak and unwell during the day, leaving the hunting and chores to the 2 girls. But at night, he's as energetic as a dragon. The Weiss team, meanwhile, mostly fetches water. Jermaine got lazy the other day and used snow to boil water, almost costing a teammate's life. Sarah had to go to the stream for better water, and only then did he improve. They desperately need food. Today, they planned a hunt, but Jermaine is afraid of the cold. He saw a rabbit nearby but had no weapons, so he could only watch helplessly as the rabbit bolted away. Realizing there were rabbits around, he quickly went back to set up traps. The Weiss group had already set traps by the creek and built a dam to catch fish, hoping for trout. Jack's foot injury still hadn't improved. He heard that peeing on it might help, but Sarah thought it was infected. Jack claimed his father was a toe scientist and that he knew a bit about toes himself. He believed the infection was a sign of healing. Sarah couldn't help but laugh, thinking, well, if he thinks it'll get better, then fine. It's not my foot anyway. Was headed to the stream to check on the fish. He noticed the water level was low and there were too many rocks in the deeper parts. If they could turn those rocks into a dam, it would help. But in this freezing weather, getting into the water would drain their body heat fast. They needed to catch fish, so they lit a fire nearby to warm up quickly. Stripping off their fur clothes, they risked freezing. They waded into the water to move the rocks. Jack was shivering and yelling. Within 2 minutes, their fingers went numb and Jack's foot turned purple from the cold. Hopefully, this dam would be worth it. Meanwhile, Trisha's group was also making adjustments. Preparing for a hunt, Granny Trish, the main provider, now stays home. They haven't eaten in 6 days, and Jeremy is starving. While Jeremy went out, Granny Trish stayed in the shelter carving wooden toys, likely because it was too cold outside. Jeremy isn't in the best shape. He went to check the traps, but although they were triggered, they didn't catch anything. He reset the traps while Tracy sat in the shelter, with snow constantly blowing in. Why not spend time fixing the roof? Is carving wooden toys really that fun? Jeremy explored nearby and saw a grouse just 2 meters away, but unfortunately, he missed it. Twice in a row, he failed to catch anything. He deserved it. Granny mocked him with her wooden toys, and the grouse taunted him from the front. His arrow got stuck in the wood, making him feel brain dead, a total mess. Every day, the 2 girls head out to hunt and work by the river. Today, Joe tagged along. They split up. Gary and Joe went fishing, while Kai took the bow to hunt. The river had frozen overnight, so they had to break the ice with stones first. Joe was clueless, throwing tons of stones without making a dent. Since physical attacks weren't working, I jokingly suggested using magic, like peeing on the ice to melt it. After clearing the ice, they used worms as bait. The trout were plentiful. Jeremiah was out looking for rabbits. There were many rabbits nearby, and he was setting up some hunting traps. He was so stingy with the carrots that I wondered if any rabbit would actually come. Maybe only those rabbits who just broke up and were looking for a rope to hang themselves. Jeremiah has cut a bunch of branches and arranged them to make the traps look more natural. Let's see if any rabbit decides to end it all. Kai is out with a bow and arrow, spotting rabbit tracks and a rabbit in the thicket. He takes aim and shoots. Whether he hits it or not isn't the point. It's all about looking cool and acting fast. The rabbit is right there, but he misses several times. Kai, don't get mad. This rabbit has already given you enough chances. 3 strikes and you're out. What more do you want? Why not ask the rabbit to cook itself and serve it to you? Meanwhile, Gary and Joe are fishing. Joe is finally about to start. Finally, Gary did something unexpected. He dove straight into the water, leaving me speechless. In the wilderness survival game, that was a pretty wild move. The worst part? He didn't even catch the fish. Why so hasty? The fat fish he almost had slipped away because of his dive. Gary claimed it was an instinctive reaction, not intentional. His move and explanation were both surprising. With that instinct, he almost seems like a caveman. His fur and shoes got soaked, which was a big loss. Jermaine came to the stream and saw trout in the water. The rabbit trap was already set. Alright, if they can still catch some fish, then food won't be a problem. He also plans to build a dam here. Wes came running over, and they decided to build the dam together. For such a small stream, they even managed to build a bridge across it. Should I call them smart or foolish? They moved stones into the water, and Sarah cut branches to block it. Soon, the dam was built. They also found some crayfish, and Sarah prepared a device to catch them. They did a lot of work today, hoping for a good harvest. The wind outside was very strong, so they returned to the shelter to warm up. Jeremy was still out hunting, but he didn't catch anything. After several days of cold, he's getting used to the temperature here. He saw a lot of fresh moose droppings on the ground, which looked quite appetizing. He plans to collect some to grind into coffee for Grandma Tracy. There were also moose tracks in the snow. A moose weighs 1,500 pounds. If he could catch one, they'd have roast meat every day. He did spot a moose nearby, and the moose saw Jeremy too. They seemed to be in a standoff, but Jeremy chose to go home. If it were me, I'd definitely pull out my red underwear to attract it. Jeremy is such a wimp. Jeremy. He went to check the rabbit traps, but it was a mess when he got there. Rabbits had been around, so he reset the traps. Sarah thought the rabbits were too big for the snares, but Jermaine knew better. He ignored her nagging and told her to focus on her fish traps instead of complaining. Sarah believed she had more experience, but Jermaine found her whining really annoying. Back at the shelter, Sarah vented to Wes about Jermaine. Wes also thought Jermaine was a ticking time bomb, which showed the underlying prejudice white people had against black people. Meanwhile, Jermaine was outside setting more traps, hoping to catch a rabbit. With a house full of people to feed, including a strong little girl and the elderly, Jermaine was the main provider. That night, a rabbit came by. The rabbit detected various scents and avoided the trap. Sarah suggested enlarging the snare, though I doubt her rabbit-catching skills given her past failures. On the seventh day, Vaz checked the creek early and noticed the water level had risen, with fish swimming around. It was a prime day for fishing, especially if they could find bait. Jack was crafting a fishing tool, and Vaz found bugs and dung that might work as bait. Sarah also went foraging. Everyone was putting in effort, which was great. Jack and Vaz went to the creek to fish, standing on the ice, hoping for some luck. Sarah found some cacti, which could provide about 40 calories. Before they caught any fish, eating some cactus to fill their stomachs was a good idea. Sarah collected a lot of cacti and planned to make lunch for her teammates. Vaz and Jack didn't have suitable bait, so they couldn't catch any fish. Sarah brought the cactus back to the shelter. Although it was hard to process, Jack was already satisfied. It was better than sitting in the shelter waiting to die. Everyone in their group was working very hard. Cactus. The taste is like glue, not very appetizing, just a small snack. The Kai team went fishing again, returning to yesterday's spot. The girls just wanted to catch some fish for lunch. Fishing is fine, but hopefully, Gary won't have another instinctive reaction. If he does, Joe might really lose it. A turtle appeared on the water's surface, but unfortunately, it didn't bite and even broke the bait. They kept trying to fish there, each attempt nerve-wracking. Finally, a fish took the bait, and they successfully caught one. This fish weighed about 2 pounds, making today a good day. Lunch was finally sorted, and Joe was so excited he almost cried. This was their first successful hunt, a breakthrough in their survival here. Kai couldn't wait to clean the fish and skewer it on a stick to roast. Soon, the fish was ready. The Kai team was the first to eat meat, and they gained immense confidence from it. The fish tasted amazing, and they saved the innards as bait. Oh my god, I've realized a bit of effort. I had my Brian just can't cry when you're having in that bite of me. It tastes like line now, the same in it right now. Feel the energy.
That bite of meat, it tastes like life. Mouth is sending it right now. Feel the energy, like just...
This feels like
it resets everything back to day one. After eating their fill, they continued fishing. Wes and his team checked the dam they set up yesterday. There were quite a few mushrooms in the water, and if they could catch them, it would be even better. The water had gotten deeper, but Sarah's fish trap still wasn't ready after 2 days. Jermaine was speechless and had to weave faster himself. Sarah thought weaving the fish trap was pointless, which made Jermaine so angry he could scream. They started arguing again over the fish trap. Fans who watched Jeff's season know. Everyone knows Sarah is super annoying. This is the toughest wilderness survival I've ever seen. 12 champion contestants return to challenge survival in a snowy mountain at -30°C. The campfire is buried in snow, and boiled water freezes right away. The only solace is sleeping in the shelter with a breathtaking view. It's the 8th day, and the weather is bitterly cold. Heavy snow falls outside the shelter, and they nearly lost control last night. In the middle of the night, heavy rain began pouring down. Wes's shelter couldn't keep the water out, and the freshly boiled water froze almost instantly. They had to keep the fire burning all night to stay warm. The wind outside howled like ghosts. They huddled inside, their teeth chattering from the cold. Jeremy and Grandma Zishi wrapped themselves in blankets. Snow had put out the fire in the shelter. Without warm-up exercises tonight, they might not survive the night. By morning, it was still raining, and Wes, too scared to go out to pee, hadn't slept at all. The wood supply was nearly depleted, so they sent Germaine to gather more. Wood was their most valuable resource today. Even moving a log to the shelter door was freezing. Vaz's shelter, housing 2 men and a woman under blankets, was the best, but they still felt freezing. Jack kept adding heat to the blankets, but it didn't seem to help. Over at Kai's group, although the campfire was covered in snow, Joey could still smile. Who wouldn't be happy sleeping with 2 girls every night? Trisha's group had it the hardest. Jeremy woke up thirsty, only to find the boiled water had turned to ice. Their shelter felt like the outdoors, with snow piling up at the bed's foot. They huddled under blankets with Grandma Trish daily as it snowed outside. Their shelter didn't even have a door. I've seen lazy contestants, but never this lazy. It's like they were matched to win by doing nothing. For contestants living in a woodpile like them, I hope the blizzard gets even worse. The wood is right there, but they won't even start a fire to keep warm. If it were me, I'd be doing warm-up exercises with Grandma. Grandma Zishi is here to win by doing nothing. At her age, she can afford to, but the young guy still has some pride. She decided to get up and check the traps. She came here to survive, not to nap with Grandma daily. She was already frustrated that the show paired her with Grandma. Why do others get stunning beauties with long legs, and she gets Grandma, who just wants to win by doing nothing? You can see in her eyes she wants to kill the cameraman. Jeremy went outside to chop branches. What is she planning? Maybe she's planning to improve the shelter? Tracy is forced to help too. The snow keeps falling heavily. If the shelter is not perfected, it is estimated that tomorrow the program team will come to collect the corpses for them, and they have collected a lot of branches. As Trish brought the branches back, her feet went numb in minutes, and Jeremy's bird froze solid. It was even worse than coins. Trish hurried to start a fire inside the shelter to warm up, while Jeremy worked outside to reinforce it. He also planned to build a door, or else the night wind would give me a headache. We agreed it was necessary since the wind had already blown through. Our shelter needs an upgrade. Is this the right size? Yeah, it is. Soon, a shelter was quickly covered with branches by Jeremy, but it wasn't enough. Jeremy continued to gather more branches. The tighter the shelter, the warmer it is, and the Gillamai are so cold that they don't feel it, and they boil water with blood. Day 9 dawned with heavy snowfall. The Vaz tribe stayed huddled in their shelter, too scared to go outside. Jack's foot injury remained a constant source of pain. When he went out to fetch water, he checked the stream. He saw a fresh layer of ice forming on the stream. After returning with the water, he planned to hunt squirrels. Jack grabbed his slingshot and ventured into the woods, having heard squirrels while fetching water. Meanwhile, Vaz stayed busy. He noticed plenty of wax mushrooms in the water and decided to make a shrimp trap, similar to a fish trap. Hopefully, they'll catch some food. Sarah isn't idle either. She plans to hunt a rabbit. The whole Vaz team is very proactive, but they haven't had any luck yet. Sarah is confident they'll soon have roasted meat. She looks for rabbit signs in the area. He discovers numerous rabbit droppings indicating a frequent rabbit path. Sarah sets a trap there to catch them. She camouflaged the trap with branches, surrounded the area with wood, and set up a pathway with snares along it. If the rabbits go through the snares, we might catch them. But I don't get. Why would the rabbit come in here? Is there some tasty carrot inside? I still hope Sarah can enjoy a meal of roasted meat. Wes's group, made up of 2 men and 1 woman, is pretty lazy, always staying in the shelter to keep warm. Why is there such a difference in enthusiasm? The temperature swings wildly, prompting the crew to check on the contestants' health. You can picture how brutal the weather is. I recall the last time the survival show crew checked on the contestants. Back then, there was a once-in-60 years flood that submerged the shelter at Giansipa. Those contestants were truly miserable but incredibly strong.
Like it's your last. Say a prayer like it's your.
This time, they are also experiencing a blizzard, so the crew is checking their health. It would be bad if someone died. In continuous cold, the heart rate speeds up. If the heart rate stays above 100, it becomes potentially dangerous. Joe fainted from the cold a few days back. Now, he's really worried about being disqualified. After his checkup, Joe's heart rate shot up to 130 and his blood pressure spiked, putting him at risk of a heart attack. Sarah's blood pressure is high too, but overall, the contestants' conditions remain stable. The doctor assured Joe they would keep monitoring him. If his condition worsens, they'll make him leave right away. Joe must also watch his health and stay hydrated. When Sarah heard she might have to withdraw, she burst into tears. Jeremy, after resting in the shelter, went out to check the traps again. She hasn't eaten in 9 days and craves roasted meat. The small stream is full of fish. Despite having a fishing hook, she can't catch any fish and feels utterly hopeless and uncomfortable standing there. Even urinating is painful. The birds are huddled up tightly. How could it not be painful? She always returns empty-handed. Hunting is tough in this cold. Tracy can only boil water in the shelter. Jeremy is miserable because he can't urinate. He feels miserable lying in bed in broad daylight. Wouldn't it be better to go for a run outside than to lie here? Tracy suspects Jeremy has a bladder infection. If they lose another teammate, she definitely won't be able to stay. The snow keeps falling relentlessly. Kai's group had grilled fish 2 days ago and is the most comfortable right now. At least they've had roasted meat. Joe's health is not good. Gary is very worried about his condition. Although today's checkup was a bit scary, Joe still decided to go out hunting. It's still snowing outside. The 2 girls backed out, but she stepped up. She's quite a tough one, standing there in the heavy snow. Joe trembled and struggled to breathe, longing for thermal underwear. She aimed to catch a rabbit for food. She went into the thicket to search, hoping to find a rabbit, but what puzzled me was why she deliberately exposed her backside. Sometimes, the contestants' actions baffle me. After searching in vain for a rabbit, she saw the weather worsening in the distance. Kai hurried to gather wood to avoid freezing at night. Wes chopped wood outside while the strong girl cried for hours. Wes knew Sarah well. Although she wanted to win by doing nothing, she could endure hunger. Wes decided to go hunting. Finding some food would boost her confidence. Wes and Jermaine explored nearby, finding many bones on the ground. These were likely left by a cougar. Jermaine found a plant here that acts as a vasodilator. In cold weather, blood vessels tighten to keep the core warm. Breathing in this vasodilator would reduce her blood pressure. Simply put, it reduces blood pressure. Jermaine brought it to the shelter for Sarah, who quickly fashioned a straw. She planned to smoke the flower. In civilized society, this is not used, but it's common in indigenous tribes. In short, it's addictive. Watching him smoke while his teammates shivered outside was disheartening. After a few puffs, he felt quite at ease. He eagerly awaited the doctor to measure his blood pressure now. Jack planned to explore the west side, a new area for him. He saw many footprints here, signs of animals running. It seemed like traces of a chase. Following the footprints, Jack found a wolf. It looked fresh, indicating how cold the blizzard night was. The wolf had frozen to death. It had a lot of meat, and Jack was incredibly lucky this time. The wolf had plenty of meat to sustain them for days. Jack hauled the 50-pound carcass back to the shelter for his teammates. Next, they planned how to butcher the wolf. Finding a wolf in a survival show was a first for me. I have to say, the props team knows their stuff. They roasted the meat in an iron pot. After 9 days without food, they finally had roasted meat. It tasted amazing, like steak, at least for the next 5 days. They can have roasted meat daily.
Jake's doing a bit of barbecuing down here.
Pretty exciting. It's the first food that I've smelled and
Lunch and dinner at their backstrap for lunch.
That actually makes me super excited.
I've only had it in a stew. It's kind of exactly what I thought it was going to taste like.
it's kind of like when you get one of those. I mean, it's not like
I'm happy about it. I can't even chew that. Right now it's I'm not gonna run home and shoot me when I cook it up. Over at Trish's group, Jeremy's bladder is bothering him. Trish fears he might drop out, but all they can do is hope it improves. Trish is also forced to go out and work. She went to check the traps and reset them. Catching a beaver would be ideal. Jeremy is curled up in the shelter, keeping warm by the fire. Their group is struggling. Trish found a big patch of cattails. She plans to dig up some cattails to eat. The roots are rich in starch and, when cooked, are similar to potatoes, providing 80 calories. But Trish's shovel can't dig them up, so she had to give up. Every night, they go to bed hungry. Vaza's group is the most comfortable, feasting on roasted meat even as a midnight snack. Being full helps them endure the cold. Their group is bouncing back impressively, while Wes's group considers a rat a luxury. Everyone else seems to be starving, except for them, who are enjoying a meat feast. Tonight, they are fully satisfied. It's the 10th day, and the weather is great. Kai's group is gearing up for an early morning hunt. The doctor checked on Xiao again. His heart rate remains high. The doctor advised him to keep drinking lots of water. They can't keep a contestant with such a high heart rate here. Kai and Gary are worried about Xiao. Originally planning to hunt together, Xiao had to stay in the shelter to rest while Kai and Gary went hunting. Wes and Jermaine are also out hunting. Sarah isn't feeling well and has to stay in the shelter. All she can do is drink water day after day. Wes found a lot of cacti here. They plan to collect the cacti to eat. Their dam isn't catching fish and the snares aren't trapping rabbits. Now, finding cacti feels like a stroke of luck. Trisha's group is struggling the most. Progress is slow each day. Their main challenge is keeping the shelter's fire going. Jeremy went out to look for cattails. He set the cattail patch on fire to melt the ice underneath, making it easier to dig up the roots. Jeremy tried digging with a shovel but found no cattail roots. Their potato dream is dashed once more. Although they can endure hunger for 14 days, just lying here to win the $100,000 feels wrong. Jermaine returned to the shelter with the cacti. Today, they finally had food to eat, which made Sarah very happy. They cut the cactus into small pieces and roasted it in an iron pot. They caramelized it and then added water to cook it. Although the food wasn't plentiful, it was their first meal here. Having something to eat was quite good. They quickly finished cooking the cactus and it tasted very good. After being hungry for 10 days, even cactus tasted delicious. A doctor came to re-examine Sarah. If her condition improved, she could stay. Fortunately, Sarah was able to continue in the competition. Sarah, who once cried countless times daily, could now smile. They were thrilled to stay and keep competing. Kai and his team went to the cafeteria to fish, hoping to eat grilled meat. They had the fire ready, but the doctor came again. He needed to check Joe's health again. Joe's heart rate had been elevated for several days, and if it continued, he would have to leave. The checkup showed a result of 14.8, so for his safety, the doctor decided Joe had to leave the competition. Even though Joe wanted to stay with the two girls, he had no choice but to go. This time, it seemed he really had to go. As the happiest man there, he had enjoyed 10 wonderful days. What surprises will they bring us next? Don't miss the next video update. How tough is real wilderness survival? Do you think they just munch on wild veggies or sit around eating ants? True experts have incredible hunting skills. They hunted a wolf, relished roasted wolf meat, caught big fish, and even had a beautiful woman join them. They grilled fish in the shelter, caught wild rabbits, and enjoyed tasty stew in an iron pot, all while surviving in the snowy mountains. It's like a vacation. By the 10th day, Wes and his group were so hungry that even after eating some cactus, the ants on the ground looked appetizing. Jermaine was shocked when Wes suggested eating ants, so he tried one and found it tasted worse than boogers. Wes, however, kept picking them up and eating them. Despite this, Wes's team has had the most comfortable time, having hunted a wolf and enjoyed its meat, even making bone soup. But they're still not satisfied with Jack's next plan. The plan was to catch fish, but Vaz was more interested in the crayfish in the stream. Fish or crayfish, as long as they caught something, it was fine. Vaz set his traps in the water, hoping for crayfish. There were plenty of trout, and Sarah was making fishing gear to catch them. Having already eaten wolf meat, catching fish wasn't crucial. The mindset was key. Sarah kept looking for a fishing spot in the snow, while Wes and his group were starving. Jermaine has been hunting rabbits, but his traps haven't caught any. Sarah's fish trap isn't ready yet either. These setbacks have shaken their group's confidence. Wes spends his days collecting wood, while Sarah lounges around, hoping to win the prize by doing nothing. Wes is getting frustrated with her. Jermaine and Sarah had already argued over the fish trap, and Wes doesn't want to lose his temper with her, so he tries to reason with her calmly. Although Sarah is still a young girl, she's as strong as an ox. Wes doesn't dare argue with her. He says, I'm getting impatient. She's taking forever with that fish basket. It's been like 4 or 5 days now. I'm hungry and stressed out. I appreciate open communication, but Jeremy is already starving. For 10 days, we've only had water. We tried digging for cattail roots, but the permafrost is too hard for our small shovel. They couldn't dig at all, so they rummaged through deadwood, hoping to find bait for fishing. Fishing is simple, but finding bait in this freezing environment is tough. Luckily, Granny Tracy found a worm, and Jeremy immediately started making a fishing rod. This worm might change their fate. If not, the show crew might as well come to collect their bodies. Trout are swimming in the water. With worms, you'll have endless fish to eat. The Kai team is also weakening, with Joe's heart rate continuously spiking. While fishing, Joe was dragged away by the doctor, leaving only Kai and Gary. On the surface, it seems like they're down one person, but in reality, it's the same. Joe was useless to the team, lying in the shelter all day waiting for food and drink. Except for being somewhat useful at night, he contributed nothing. Kai and Gary went back to the shore to fish. The weather warmed up, and they hoped to catch some fish. They spent hours fishing every day but caught nothing. Suddenly, Gary felt a bite. Sure enough, he caught a big fish. This fish was so large that one hand couldn't hold it. Kai looked at the fish in his hand, unsure of what to do for a moment. This was their second successful catch, and Gary felt a glimmer of hope for survival. They roasted the fish on sticks, and soon it was ready. The fish was enough to fill both of them up. The meat was tender and juicy, and they couldn't stop eating. By evening, the wind picked up, and it started snowing. Wes and his group huddled in the shelter, hearing footsteps outside, too scared to sleep. Occasionally, they heard growls. Wes guessed it was a wild animal. Isn't that obvious? If it's not a wild animal, what else could it be? A wild ghost. A feline was prowling outside. On the 11th day, Jermaine noticed animal tracks on the ground early in the morning. They guessed it was a lion, which was extremely dangerous. Wearing fur all the time, they could easily be mistaken for prey. They had to be very cautious of a lion ambush while hunting. The wind was strong today. Jermaine checked the rabbit traps daily, but the lion's presence last night made him anxious. The traps were perfect, but no rabbits were caught. Maybe the rabbits here were just too carefree. If any rabbit had a mortgage or car loan, it would be desperate enough to fall into Jermaine's trap. Jermaine was hunting nearby and felt something following him. In fact, the lion had already spotted him and was preparing to ambush. Jermaine saw lion tracks on the ground and quickly left the area in fear. After eating grilled fish, Kai and Gary returned to the shelter, feeling energized. Joe would definitely be the target of their venting. Gary and Kai sat discussing, and Joe missed the days when Joe was around. During the days of radio calisthenics, Kai got a fish bone stuck in his teeth and called a doctor to check it out. The doctor examined him and found it was just a mouth ulcer, nothing serious. Jack was exploring nearby with an axe, planning to make a death trap. The squirrels around were too arrogant, so Jack decided to kill them with a rock. He picked a flat stone and cut a branch. Using the stone and branch, he made an automatic device. As soon as a squirrel sensed the stick, the stone would crush it. Hopefully, this stone would bring him some squirrels. Sarah was gathering wood nearby when she noticed her throat felt sore. Could it be the wolf meat virus? She carried the wood back to their now spacious and well-developed shelter, feeling short of breath. She called for the handsome doctor, saying she needed help breathing. The doctor soon arrived with his equipment. First things first, let's check your blood pressure and heart rate, the doctor said. He noted that altitude sickness was common in this high-altitude area. Sarah's diagnosis was high-altitude pulmonary edema, where increased vascular pressure causes fluid to leak into the lungs, a potentially life-threatening condition if untreated. The doctor advised her to rest immediately if she felt short of breath. Who knew collecting firewood could lead to this? Meanwhile, Jeremy and Grandma Tracy had been fishing by the creek for hours without any luck, so Jeremy decided to try a different spot. Fishing in a deeper spot where there are more fish. They set up many fishing rods here, their eyes filled with hope. He kept a close watch on the rods, and finally, he caught a fish. Although it was a small fish, it was still protein. This thumb-sized fish was enough to fill Granny up. Their successful catch boosted their confidence, and soon they caught another fish. This one was bigger than the first. Granny, who hadn't eaten in 10 days, could hardly wait to devour it raw. They were overjoyed. Meanwhile, Wes's team was still working on the fish trap, which might take another 2 days. In a few days, they could go home. It seemed he wanted to take the fish trap home to catch fish. After 5 days of work, he finally finished it. Shala felt incredibly proud, but Black Brother looked at him with disdain. They took the fish trap to the stream, planning to set it there. This was Shala's precious creation. Wes carefully placed it in the water, knowing Shala would be upset if anything went wrong, even at this close distance. They had to wade into the water to set the trap properly. It took some creativity to come up with this, and Wes seemed to respect Shala's effort, given it took 5 days to make. Meanwhile, the Jack team had perfected their shelter, stocked with firewood and airtight. With no worries about food or drink, they were quite comfortable. Their traps hadn't caught anything, but one wolf was enough to last until the end. Vass helped remake the traps, hoping for one more big meal. Jeremy's team returned to the shelter to grill fish. The shelter is set up for grilling fish, and now they can also cook meat. There's not much fish, but it's still protein. Jeremy, who had never tried trout before, was thrilled. After 10 days of hunger, even without seasoning, it tasted amazing. Grandma was very thankful to Jeremy, and they enjoyed the grilled fish together in the shelter. Wes's team is struggling the most. They have many members but don't work. It took them 5 days to make a fish trap, so they deserve to eat ants. Jermaine checked the rabbit traps and finally caught one. Either this rabbit has a mortgage and car loan, or the show crew arranged it. Maine proudly shows off the rabbit to Wes, feeling ecstatic. One rabbit is enough to satisfy them on the 10th day, and everyone gets to enjoy grilled meat. Wes looks at Jermaine with envy. Sarah is preparing the rabbit meat. Jermaine did a great job. There's not much meat, but if it were up to me, I'd make soup. They fry the rabbit meat in an iron pot. Just a few pieces of thigh meat smell delicious, filling the wilderness with the aroma of grilled meat. One bite is crispy and tastes like chicken. Today's grilled meat is their first proper meal since arriving. Kai and Gary also went out hunting. Kai's teeth were inflamed, so he was looking for some birch bark to chew on, which contains methyl salicylate to help with pain and inflammation. Gary was gathering wood nearby. These two girls were working very hard. At night, the wind picked up again, but perhaps they had adapted to the temperature here, and with some meat to eat, they didn't feel very cold. Their shelter was well built, so they didn't feel cold at all. On the 12th day, Sarah was milking in the morning. The wind was blowing hard outside, and it felt a bit chilly, but Jack dismissed it, saying it wasn't that cold. Sarah hid in her clothes and started crying, but after a few seconds, she put them back on because she really felt cold. She kept crying in the shelter because of what Jack said in the morning. She felt Jack's words hurt her more than the cold. Crying for hours over this? I can't believe it. This is a tough survival show. If you wanna cry, go home. Vaz and Jack came back from their work. He's still crying even after Jack apologized, feeling deeply wronged. With just 2 days left, he's throwing a tantrum. Is he thinking of quitting or making his teammates feel guilty to share the prize? Vaz thinks Sarah's lack of confidence is bad for survival. She's sulking, prompting them to call the doctor. But they only find Vaz and Jack sleeping. Sarah has already gone out. The doctor checks her, and the team is very worried about her health, especially with only 2 days left. If she has to quit due to her health, it would be a major setback. The checkup results were terrible. Sarah even has a fever. She needs further medical examination. Now Sarah is really struggling. Is the $100,000 prize slipping away? With just 2 days left, anyone would be devastated. Vaz tried to comfort her, saying, "In my heart, you're not a loser. You just didn't get the prize. Winning or losing isn't what matters. What matters is whether you can get the prize." What surprises will the contestants bring us next? Stay tuned for the next episode. The survival experts on the show are incredibly skilled. Two women grabbed a stone and began striking it. They created a sharp stone shard and scraped pine branches. Heating the branches produced a sticky glue. They glued the stone shard to a wooden stick and secured it with a rope, creating a highly effective spear. This time, they aimed to hunt the fiercest black bear. It was the 13th day of the new season of the Wilderness Survival Show. Early this morning, the crew came to them with shocking news. Last night, they had heard unusual sounds while in their shelter. There was a helicopter flying overhead, seemingly searching for something, and they could also hear dogs barking. This was the snowy wilderness. Why were there helicopters and dogs? No one knew what was happening, and then they heard sirens. What had happened nearby? The crew soon revealed the answer. A grizzly bear had killed a local man the previous night. Hearing this terrified Jamie. With evacuation day tomorrow, the crew urged them to craft hunting tools for safety. Wes and the others were alarmed. The grizzly bear incident had happened just a kilometer away from them. The crew shared some details and instructed them to gather for evacuation tomorrow. Jack knew a lot about bear behavior. Bears dislike human disturbances. Jeremy's group, the weakest, included an elderly woman. They should pray before heading out tomorrow. Gary and Kai, the two women, were not afraid at all. Grizzly bears are massive. They stand much taller than humans and run faster too. If it came to a fight, humans would surely be devoured by the grizzly. Gary and Kai needed to prepare for tomorrow's evacuation. They planned to make weapons to hunt the black bear, leading to the scene at the beginning of the video where the two women crafted weapons. They kept striking the stone until they got a sharp shard, then fixed it onto a stick to make a spear. In the primitive Stone Age, people used such weapons for hunting. Kai and Gary were indeed skilled and brave enough to hunt a grizzly bear. Jermaine and Sarah set out to gather food, aiming for a hearty meal before tomorrow's evacuation. They needed a good meal to have the strength to face the grizzly. Sarah had earlier made a fish trap and set it in a stream for crayfish, but they hadn't caught any crayfish yet. Jermaine found some wild berries nearby, which were edible. Even a fly is meat. Wes went to the west to check the fish trap, hoping to catch some crayfish. In his last two challenges, Wes didn't reach evacuation day, but this time he did. Fortunately, the fish trap had some crayfish. Sarah pulled a crayfish out of the trap. They were quite big, but there were only two. The three of them were overjoyed, and Sarah started howling like crazy. Jeremy took Grandma to the west to fish, as they had been hungry for over 10 days. The young guy had turned into an old man. They saw a beaver swimming happily in the water. Jeremy remembered the traps he had set earlier. They went to check the beaver traps, hoping to catch one for a feast. Unfortunately, the traps failed again. They reset them, hoping to have roasted beaver tonight. "Beaver in the water, please come to our trap," they hoped aloud. Meanwhile, Jack and Boz searched nearby for food. Tomorrow is evacuation day, and they all want to eat well before setting off. They checked the squirrel traps. The stone had been triggered. Jack picked it up and found a small mouse underneath. They didn't want to eat such a tiny mouse, but they planned to use it as bait for fishing. Boz put the mouse in the fish trap, hoping to attract crayfish. Then they grabbed their bows and arrows to hunt rabbits. Animal bones were scattered all around, a sign of nearby predators. This place was like an animal graveyard. It was best to return before dark. Jeremy and Grandma went back to the fishing spot. Catching beavers was tough, so they depended on fishing. Without a catch, they'd go hungry overnight. They picked up the fishing rod. To their amazement, they caught a large fish. Grandma, starving, wanted to eat it raw. Instead, they roasted it on a stick. This was their second time having roasted fish. They alternated bites of fish with ice. Though small, the fish was tender and juicy. Having a roasted meal before leaving was a real blessing, but Jeremy still longed for beaver meat. Seeing the beaver swimming around, he wondered if it had a bulletproof vest. Sarah thought the 2 crayfish were a hard-earned catch, and she took all the credit. They boiled the crayfish in clean water. Sarah ate one herself. Wes and Jermaine split the other crayfish, devouring it like a roasted chicken leg. At least they had a decent meal before leaving. Jack and Boz returned to the shelter, but apart from catching a mouse today, they were still hungry. Jack's foot was rotting, but they could get treatment at home tomorrow. Naturally, the $100,000 mattered more than a toe. A doctor examined it, but couldn't they just clean and bandage it? Jack believed he could keep competing, but the doctor didn't agree. They planned to carry Jack out on the final day, thinking they could save the $100,000 prize. But Jack insisted he could continue, and Boz was willing to help him. They used the excuse of checking the crayfish traps and indeed caught 2 crayfish. I suspect the show arranged it. Why is it always 2 crayfish? They cooked them with wolf bones. Despite only having 2, it was a feast before they left. Such a big piece of crayfish meat would surely fill them up. That night, a strong wind blew, and on their last night, they couldn't sleep well. Gary and Kai went hungry, and the wind was fierce. Wes stayed up all night again, shivering in the cold. Since Sarah and Jermaine were by the small fire, old Wes had to sleep alone. Boz and his group were likely the most comfortable. Although the fire wasn't big, they had plenty of fur. On the morning of the 14th day, they woke up early. Jeremy and Grandma shivered quietly. At dawn, they got up, smeared charcoal on their faces, seemingly to show off. Gary and Kai stayed up all night, likely due to the cold and the anticipation of the $100,000 prize. If it were me, I wouldn't be able to sleep either. In the morning, the doctor came to check on Jack again. They were about to leave, so why check? Were they looking for an excuse to carry Jack out early? After the check, they found out that if the doctor had come a minute later, his toe might have healed. In the end, they couldn't find a reason, so they let Jack continue the competition. Wes and his group were making clothes from fur. It was the final day, and they were still making clothes. Everyone was prepared to head to the meeting point from their various locations. They had to be cautious of lions, deer, and bison attacks while following the map to the evacuation point. Each team had to walk over 10 kilometers, and the terrain they faced was different. The challenges they encountered varied. But with the lure of a $100,000 prize, these difficulties are nothing. They have to follow the river. Their toughest task is crossing the river. The ice is treacherous, and their fur shoes make slipping easy. Slipping is easy. While discussing it, Jack showed us firsthand. Luckily, nothing happened, but it felt really bad. As the saying goes, if you walk by the river often, your shoes will get wet. Wes's team is bundled up tightly today, ready for a bear attack. They're hungry but still happy. They need to cross the river, but there's no ice, just a log bridge. Jamie finds it tough to walk on. Without some wisdom, it's impossible to cross the log bridge. Soon, they all made it across the log bridge. This means they are wise. Gary and Kai found bear tracks on the road. Could they really encounter a bear? If that's the case, the stone spear they made will come in handy. Kai even wants to hunt a bear to eat. Jeremy and the old lady set off together. Their route is easier, though they still need to cross a river, but they found a log bridge. If they stay sharp, they can cross the log bridge, but they still need to climb a mountain after being hungry for over 10 days. On the last day, they faced the mountain again, and the old lady took off her shoes. She just wants Jeremy to carry her. It's a miracle Jeremy didn't kick her off. This old lady is quite ugly but has high hopes. Just a small hill exhausted her. Hurry up, once you get up there, you can get the prize. Sarah and her team are shouting as they walk, not afraid of bears at all. I know these types well. They act tough but are the first to cry if they really encounter a bear. Gary and Kai are hiking on a clear, easy path when Kai loses his balance and slips. For shoes make walking tough. Jeremy's team is still climbing for the $100,000 prize. Why is it so difficult for them? But once they get the $100,000, Jeremy can marry old lady Tracy. Wes's team and Jeremy's team met up. They formed a 5-person team and continued forward. Vaz and Jack also met up with Gary and Kai, forming a 4-person team. It's safer to walk in a group. They walked along the river for a few hours. The old lady started feeling very tired, lagging behind the group. Gary's team didn't feel the same and soon caught up with them. They came across the other team's vehicle. I can't figure out why they arrived together, but it was clearly staged for the show. Ultimately, they conquered the 14-day survival challenge in the snowy mountains, each winning $100,000. This was their hardest period. Today marks their hard-earned victory, concluding this season. Can't wait for the next one.